Hello everyone, here Pal 6 Speed here, and today we are going to do an overview of the rebuild of my 1971 Mercury 500 Thunderbolt. So, what happened? So, in July 2018, I was approaching the dock, I went to let go of the throttle, and the thing could hardly run. Take a look for yourself. First thing I did when I got the boat home, thought it might have been bad gas. I cleared out all of the fuel as much as possible and filled it with some fresh Chevron 94, mixed it up, fired it up, basically no change. And then I discovered that the fuel pump diaphragm gasket was leaking, and so I ordered up a new one, replaced it after rebuilding the entire fuel pump, tried it again, and this is what happened. No change at all. What I ended up doing was I put a sniff of starting fluid into the bottom carburetor, and nothing happened. I then suffered a hand injury after that, and kind of just put the boat away for the winter and left it, and came back to it in March, and we did a compression check, and revealed that number 3 had very low compression. Upon looking at the plugs, we noticed that 3 and 4 didn't have any oil or carbon buildup on them, so we knew it was time to tear the motor down. So right here you can see we tore out the main plate, and we're getting the fuel system off, the distributor's off in this picture, and this is her very naked, and we took it to my buddy's place, and we pulled the Powerhead with the tractor. I had bought a special lifting eye and flywheel puller for it, so that's how we got it out, using that guy. Just runs right with the flywheel and allows me to lift the Powerhead up. I could have probably done this by hand, but it was much easier with the tractor. So that's the boat, nice and naked, nothing to it. Motor and everything else in the back of the car. Then we started the teardown, so we started by removing the exhaust plate and the side cover. Once we got the side cover off, we noticed that there's quite a bit of carbon around cylinders 1 and 2. We can see our baffle plate here. The exhaust plate's very badly corroded. We don't have much carbon buildup around 3 and 4, which is a little bit alarming, so maybe we just get some unburned fuel through it. And there we have one very badly damaged piston from the reed valve getting caught in it. Something I discovered a little bit later. So we're taking the end cover off, the water jacket cover. It's not a cylinder head. That's a common misnomer. Mercury's of this vintage do not have a cylinder head. It's cast into the block. You see, we're going to be zipping off the flywheel nut with the impact gun, and then this little guy here is a hard steel piece that pushes against the crankshaft, prevents you from marring the crankshaft. And we're using the impact gun to zip the flywheel off. That's the special puller that we have. Off comes the flywheel. It's just a tapered fit. Now we're unbolting the stator. This allows the motor to charge the battery. This was actually an option that this motor had. Electric start is also an option that this one had. Now we got the timing belt we're going to take off. That's the original. And we're going to pop off our Woodruff key and store it in a very safe place. So now we're going to loosen the main bearing caps to end bearings. Just a couple of ball bearings basically in our cast aluminum housing, so we got one on each end. Now we're undoing little metal lock tabs that hold our main bearing retaining bolts in. We have 3 of those. Now we're loosening all the bolts that hold the case house together. And there's little special pry slots. You do not want to mar this surface. And off comes the outer casing. And we're going to remove our 2 main bearing caps. That's the bottom one. And that's the top one. Now we're going to yank the crankshaft out and all the pistons and everything in one big assembly. That's how these Mercury motors come apart. As you can see in this picture, we do have a broken reed valve. and our cylinders were actually in surprisingly good shape, except number 4 had a huge gouge in it, and unfortunately required replacement of the sleeve. That was due to the failed ring pin on the 3rd ring there. And there's our number 3 piston that was well battered by that reed that went through it. So now what I'm doing is I'm actually removing the clip that holds the main bearing needles in, and the whole thing's just going to fall out all over the bench. And now we're going to take our connecting rod assemblies off. Again, these are full of needle bearings that will spill out all over the place once you get them off. I did end up stripping one of these bolts by accident, and just for sanity's sake, I replaced all 8 of them. Off comes the connecting rod end, and all the main bearings, or all the rod bearings spill out all over the place. I counted each and every one of them to make sure they were all the same. Now we're taking our piston pin clips out, one on both sides, and drive the piston pin through the socket. These were a little stuck, but not too bad. And all of our bearings will spill out of there. There's a couple of washers, one for either side of the connecting rod. There's all of our crankshaft and pistons and assemblies. So we're going off to the machine shop. Unfortunately, we had to replace the cylinder number 4 sleeve. So now we're going to resurface the reed cage from the damage from the failed reed. So we're using some sandpaper and some WD-40s. You can see I can sand like the Flash. We did this in 3 or 4 different stages so that the reed cages were very nice and polished, as you can see right there. Now we're reassembling them. We're putting brand new CCMS Sport composite reeds on there. These made actually quite a difference. And now we're going to stack the needle bearings into the small end of the rod, one by one by one. This teaches you the utmost patience. Do not drink coffee before you do this. Ask me how I know. Anywho, we have our little thrust washer on the bottom side, which you can't really see all that well, but it is in there, and that prevents the piston from wearing against the rod, or the rod actually from wearing against the piston. And now we're going to put in our connecting rod into the piston, so we're going to basically slide this up and over the piston pin, and we can slip the pin on down in there, slide our other thrust washer in, and in goes our piston pin clips. The tape is to prevent me from damaging the moly coating on these shiny new Vertex pistons. Next step, we're going to put in our top crankshaft seal. I've already hammered in the bearings on the bottom side. You can actually replace the seal without removing the bearing, or even removing the power head for that matter. We're going to put a little bit of Loctite and hammer the bottom seal in. I did put Loctite on the top seal, so don't you worry. In this case, both seal lips actually face downwards in this application. I did ask for some advice from the guys on Facebook. So now we got our second seal, so we got one seal on top of the other. Both these have to go in before the main bearing goes in, and there goes the main bearing. It's very ominous watching me do this. By some miracle, me being as accident prone as I am, did not hammer my finger. So we just want to hammer this guy down until she's flush, and you do not have a hammer on the inner race. Now we're going to stack the main needles in place. This is the earlier 71. So it only has a single row of main bearing needles. The later ones had a double row. Not sure why they did this. The single seemed to have worked fine for almost 50 years, but I did have to order in a different set of main bearing needles. My supplier that gave me the rebuild kit was cool with that. They sent it to me with no charge. So on go our main bearing shells, and then we are going to put the clip around, the little wire clip. And then on top of that, we'll go an aluminum clamshell to hold the entire thing in place. So really, you don't have to worry about the clip popping out. I did give these needle bearings a shot of 2-stroke oil before I put the bearing shell halves on. Now we'll tighten them down, torque them down. Just a little bit of 2-stroke oil to sit in the reed cage. This doesn't have any needles in it. The crankshaft just kind of floats between this, and these have a couple of Phillips head screws that hold them together. Now we're putting our connecting rod assembly, so this is actually number 4. There's a certain orientation the piston has to go in because the piston is asymmetrical to aid in the flow of gases in the cylinder. So we replaced all of our connecting rod bolts. Seaway Marine hooked me up with some new ones here in Lakewood, Washington. Thank you so much for that. Now we're dropping the entire crankshaft assembly in, putting a couple shots of oil in it. The dowel pins are installed in the block. This is a little tricky. There is a special tool for this, like I said, but apparently those tend to break piston rings, so just massaging them in by hand apparently is the best way to do it. It's a little tricky, but I ended up doing it. I can't imagine what a 6-cylinder is like, so that might be a little bit more tricky. Because there's no head, you can't feed this in from the front. Okay, so now we're going to rebuild or reseal our carburetor. So we're going to take our fuel bowl inlet off. Then we got our fuel strainer, and inside we have a gasket on the top. So yeah, picking that out right there. And now we're going to take the float bowl cover off. And then basically anything with the copper crush washer is going to come out. The idle mixture screw comes out, and now we're taking our primary and secondary float levers off. There we go. That basically pushes on the needle and allows you to shut the flow of fuel off. I did end up replacing the floats because I was having problems with the needles sealing up. So now what I'm doing is I'm basically cleaning off any of the old gasket material off of the carburetor, 50-year-old gasket material. Now we're removing our old seat. There is a copper crush washer underneath that got replaced and our new seat installed. Drop the needle back in and install our float arms. Now we're bending it to achieve the correct float adjustment, which I've shown right there. Put a new copper crush washer on that tube that goes down to the bottom of the carburetor, right through the that little tube underneath there, just for sanity's sake. It probably didn't need to be done, but since I have the motor apart, I'm not taking a chance. And now we are reinstalling our main jet plug. This covers the hole where the main jet sits. And we're now reinstalling our idle mixture screw. Do not bottom this thing out really hard or you will damage it. Now we back the screw off 1.5 turns, give us a good starting point. Now our needle and seat assembly, our float bowl cover, goes back onto the carb and slides up in place. And so I'm actually just oiling everything right now. I did check and adjust the end play of the crankshaft. I actually had to remove a shim to achieve the correct end play. Now we're putting our anaerobic gel on the mating surface. Do not use RTV for this because RTV has a thickness when it actually sets. Anaerobic gel can basically squeeze out to almost a zero thickness. That case relationship is very, very important. So now we put down our outer casing here and being very, very careful not to gash the sealant because that's very, very important. So now we're torquing all of our bolts down. I made sure to pull our crankshaft end caps back just a smidge to allow us to slide our outer casing into place. Step, we are going to torque down our 3 main bearing retaining bolts and fold over the little sheet metal locks that hold them in place. And then we will torque down our main bearing end caps. And now we're going to put our intake covers over top of our intake ports with new gaskets. These just have Phillips screws. Now we're going to put our exhaust plate, our new exhaust plate, and torque all the bolts down. These bolts require sealant on them, well, kind of like a Chevy head bolt. And now we are going to put our end cover in place. I put some RTV on the gasket just to protect the plate because it was a little corroded at the bottom. I did the same thing with the exhaust plate cover. Now we're rebuilding our fuel pump, so we're pulling off our retainer, we're replacing the check valves, putting new gaskets in them. This basically prevents the fuel from backflowing out of the carburetors and allows the pump to actually pump the fuel up to the carburetors. Now we're going to set it back down on the block and bolt it back in. As you can see in the background, I have all of our equalization hoses already installed. We put new hoses on. We put in our Woodruff key, we put in our timing belt, and now we are going to bolt our skater back on. These are quite expensive, so make sure you don't damage it. And put our flywheel back in. That was a bit of a challenge. Put our flywheel nut back on. You need a second set of hands, and strong hands at that, to hold that flywheel in place while trying to torque it. It's 55 foot-pounds. Good luck. Now we have our base gasket in place and our exhaust extension tube, and we're just going to sit this guy right back in place. No tractor required. She's actually not as heavy as I originally thought she was. I had to take this guy back out because it wasn't quite sitting right. Turns out I had an old piece of gasket stuck on it. There she is, all nice and nestled in her home. And we got our carburetors on, our distributor mount in, distributor is on, and timing belt installed and timed correctly, and our new CDI wiring harness. And just for fun, I decided to try and give her a shot, and she fired on the first try. As you can probably hear me yelling in the background, I am super excited. We didn't run her for long because we had no cooling water. So we decided to replace the water pump. Cheap insurance. So we're going to pop off our top seal and remove our impeller housing. This is quite a simple water pump, easy to replace. You just got to be careful because the shaft is made of plain steel, not stainless, so things tend to weld themselves to it, like this impeller. And we're going to put on our new base plate and gasket. And then the gasket on top of that makes it to the water pump housing. We're going to put a daub of grease to hold the impeller key in place. This does not come with a new one, so keep it and reuse it. I like to squish the impeller into the housing before putting the housing on. I just found this has worked much better for me. A little bit less wrestling. So now we're going to slide our impeller and housing back down. And the way I like to line it up is so that it'll just drop right into place. And there we go. We install our 3 bolts to the German Torx pin. Good and tight. And we install our seal back down on there, our end seal. And there she is, running all beautifully. In this shot I didn't actually tie the wires back, but I eventually did with some zip ties. At the end of the season I noticed it was misfiring a little bit when it was cold. Did a compression check, everything was good, but it turns out that the exhaust baffle plate is leaking. So we're going to have to replace that this coming season. So thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate all the love and support that you guys have given me, especially on Facebook. Everyone likes to see the boat. So stay tuned for the first start and some repairs that I'm going to be doing in the next, hopefully, couple of days. Follow me Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already done so, and thank you all so much for watching.